right, Dustin, here we are. Final episode, part 4. We're talking about leaving our kids. And in the last episode, we started to talk about some things that I think are just really great launching points. You talked about having goals for our kids, which ultimately means we've got a direction that we're setting them towards. We're hoping they achieve a certain level of maturity and health and wholeness by the end of our time parenting them. Mm-hmm. And there's so many different places to jump off of, but to set us up with this concept of leaving our kids or letting them go, I'll rifle real quick back through. We've got love and connect with our kids, correcting our kids, securing, and then finally leaving our kids, letting them go. Which right now, the age of my children are 8 and 4. And so that season, when I look to that time when it's like, see you, you're on your own, it terrifies me. It terrifies me. Yeah. But I'm guessing that you've got some thoughts and some input on helping us all as parents begin to process that. Maybe there's some people who are engaging with this and they're already in that state, right? So how would you help us set up ourselves for a trajectory for that if we're looking down that line of time, that timeline? There we go, I found it. Or if we're in that, what should we be looking for? What's kind of the foundation of letting them go?
Yeah, so the whole idea of domino parents, right, is that we're setting up a path for it to ripple into something greater at the end, right? And when we get to this eventual end of our parenting, as the primary form of that goes, right? The idea is that as they knock over every other brick, it's going to turn into something that is going to be greater than what I could create for myself. Yeah. And so the idea as discipleship, as we go and make disciples of all nations, or we go and continue to increase what our investment or discipline has been with our kids into something that goes beyond that, the hope is that they will continue to take it beyond, like I said, whatever we could have created for ourselves. So the practice, I think, aspect is huge. As you think about when they're going to be in positions without you. Yeah. I don't ever want to be away from my kids. Right. I don't ever want them to have to suffer in situations without me. Yeah. But they do. Yeah. They're at school. They suffer in certain ways that we're not there for. Yeah. And so I have to continue to practice allowing that, leaving, and trusting that what they've learned is going to continue to ripple into something successful and fruitful, and I continue to pray for them in the midst of it all, right? Yep. I mean, you and I are in a different season of life where launching isn't something we're necessarily having to... Right, it's not imminent, It's not imminent. I'm in the same way not looking forward to it. Yeah. I don't want to let them go. Yeah. So a couple things. So in terms of the practice, I think we could get into a bit of what that could look like now. Yeah. I think also what I want to talk about is what to do before we're there, even now, as we anticipate this coming. You and I have talked about this and practice some things that are really, really important in terms of what to do now. But the same thing, I said, I think in the last one where as we let them kind of develop and get to this place of, differentiating from us, creating some sense of autonomy in terms of how they see themselves and with us and with the world, that we practice our own kind of leaving, and yet we still maintain relationship and intimacy with them that's unique and special, right? But it changes because they're going to be independent. Right. So I like to discuss the idea where when kiddos are born, right, they're fully dependent on us. Mm-hmm. So we're independent, they're fully dependent, and over a period of time, it's usually around I call it pre-launch, right, 10 to 12, where they really start pushing hard against doing their own thing. Mm-hmm. They may get secretive or deceptive, but they're really trying to practice what it looks like to be individuals without the responsibility of individuality. Yep. So the pre-launch, to give them opportunity to exercise that, to test it, or often I even use the word to date it. What does it look like to date your independence? Yeah. To see who you are in the midst of this different context, which is what dating is, right? And so in so doing, when I allow that, I'm also having to figure out what does it look like to date retirement of parenting. When I'm like, I gotta figure out what my life is going to be like for the last remaining time when I'm not their active parents. Yeah.
I like that idea of practicing some of that independence. And one of the things we did with Harvey that jumped to my mind when you said practicing this was Harvey had this a little bit of separation anxiety that we're still working on with him. But one of the things we wanted to do to help him practice was, hey, just walk down to the end of the street and I'll stand at the top of the street. And anytime you get nervous, turn around and you'll see me standing right there. And he got to practice that. He made it to the end of the street and then he came back. He's like, oh, I did great. I felt awesome. And then the next time we did it, he's like, hey, do you think I could go around the corner? I was like, yeah, dude, go for it. And then if you get nervous, you just turn around. We'll be right there. So would that be along the lines of like, hey, let's practice some of this independence? Yeah.
So you think about even fear, right? This idea that what is fear? It's the perspective of future bad. So when you're desensitizing him to this fear of bad is, if I go too far, I'm going to be something bad's going to happen.
Right.
What you're doing is you're pulling him out of this future where he doesn't belong into this present where he does.
Yeah.
You're encouraging the expression of his capability, his sense of safety and security, all of those things right now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've heard some people talk about it too, that even when you provide, so in the sense of practice, I'm not there yet, but like talking through teenagers and junior high, it's something that I'm going to stick with, because I think as parents, when you give a freedom, I've already experienced this in the ages that they are on smaller levels, but just because you give a freedom and you practice doesn't mean it has to stay that way. Right. So, for example, you could say, hey, let's try you having your own cell phone. If this doesn't go well, we can always roll this back. Yeah. So talk through, I like the language you're using. Talk through how do we navigate the failure of a practice? Something goes horribly wrong, or how do we know when our practice has been successful and to keep moving down the line with that?
Certainly. Well, first of all, maybe the therapist-y comment would be there's got to be a process following that, right? If you engage it and it doesn't, there has to be process, which is to say there is effectively a debrief, right? Why did it go wrong? What was wrong? What was the actual issue, right? Because then suffering, as we've talked about before, becomes the byproduct, right? Is that there's a suffering, and it means that the suffering is a means of correction. Even one of my favorite is 1 Peter 5, I think it starts in verse 10 where it says, and the God of all grace, after you have suffered a little while, will restore you, make you strong, firm, and steadfast. And I love that, the idea that suffering is going to preclude the idea of restoration and all of the things. And so when it comes to trying something, right? If it doesn't work, there has to be process, which includes the idea of suffering.
Yeah, I like that. So let's talk about when they're ready. How do we know when our kids are in a place where we need to practice moving them into a new season? Does that make sense? So because one of the things I'm currently wrestling with is my youngest, Cohen, almost 6 months ago now turned 4, and as I'm looking at him and the way he talks. It's like dawning on me, he's not a toddler anymore. He's a boy. A boy, a kid, like rough, like he's got a full vocabulary. Today he was saying, Dad, I'm not thirsty. He wasn't saying that. He goes, Dad, I need to get hydrated. And I'm going, what are you talking about, kid? So his vocabulary is expanding and he's a boy now. But it's easy sometimes for me to still treat him like he's a toddler and some of the smaller things. So what are some of the cues and the triggers as parents to go, oh, I need to practice next stage of development? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So the idea, what's ready mean, right? What's ready mean? Is it that skills are adequate for the transition or the stage of life? Maybe that would be an easy way to describe it. But when your observations, right? I mean, why did he choose to use the word hydrated? He was testing it, right, to see if it fit the conversation. Absolutely, tried it out, right? So was he ready to use that word? Did he understand what it meant? It sure seemed like it. It sure seemed like it.
Yeah, he used it pretty well. It was pretty funny. Dad, are you hydrated? I was like, well, no, I need some water too, bud.
So the idea with this is when they are going to give them opportunity to test it, right? When they're ready. I mean, that's kind of a subjective, and often it's a subjective reference.
Sure.
Because really, were you ready to be a parent? Maybe. It's like the idea is you're going to continue to develop even through a stage in which you would ideally want to be ready for. Yeah. So I would say that one of the big things, I think you and I were talking about the training wheel scenario where I got Camden a few months going off without training wheels a few months before his 4th birthday, but I don't know if he was ready, but I was like, we're gonna try it, dude.
Yep.
We're gonna try this. Yeah. And it took a little bit, and I got a really good workout running along with him and holding, but he got it, And the idea, I think, when are our kids ready? Well, how are they practicing being adults?
Yep.
How much time are parents giving their kids to practice that adulting, right? Where they have the ability to individuate from them. They have opportunity. Well, are they got a job or getting a cell phone, as you said, or whatever? And how are they proving that their practice of adulting is going to be trustworthy, successful, and otherwise? Yeah. And that's when we start to kind of hands off more and more and more.
Yeah. Yeah.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And I think it ties back even to some of that security that we talked about in the last episode. Sure. And I love this idea of trying it on. And I think for me, sometimes with Harvey, one of the things I'm trying to do, I learned this from, I think it was Adam Grant talks about this idea of arguing and debate as a chance for even kids to try things on. And you're absolutely right with Cohen. He was trying it out. Hey, how did this go? Did I use it right? Yeah. But often when kids argue, I want to shut it down. Like, don't backtalk to me, but sometimes he's actually just trying on a different viewpoint.
Certainly.
And so if I can engage with that, or engage with, hey, Dad, can I try doing this with you? Or, hey, Dad, can I, whatever it might be, I like this idea of, hey, let's try it out and see how it goes. And then if we've got a process to then evaluate and go, that didn't go so great, did it? So what would we do different
Mutually,
next time?
yes, exactly.
Yeah. How can we do this different next time? I love that. That's cool.
Good
try
questions.
it on.
Yeah, try it on.
That's
I like
fun.
That.
So when we are working on preparing them, I've heard some conversations around the different seasons of life. I've heard one framework being that from 0 to 6, you're disciplining your kids, and you're trying to establish some very distinct, like, this is kind of who we are. We've talked about identity. Then from 6 to 12, you're trying to give them a little bit more freedom and say, hey, now I'm going to teach you how that looks. And then from 12 to 18, you're saying, now you go do it, you practice. Or like another framework would be, first you watch while I do it, and then next we do it together, and then third you do, I watch, right? That's a classic leadership one. Sure. So as we go through those three different periods of life, how do we navigate that as parents and with that goal?
Yeah. So the thought that comes up on this is this: there's kind of a real generic metric that, well, even what I use in the office, and I don't think it's just for therapists or whatever, but we call it the biopsychosocial spiritual, right? So where are they at physically? Because as infants up to high school, that's changing, obviously, psychologically, emotionally, right? They're going to have way more concrete thinking. They're going to engage relationships too with the social aspect differently, and then the spiritual sense of things. Like, where are they at spiritually? How do they see themselves with the idea of what God has created? Yep. Yeah, I can geek out super hard on like our physiology, just the simple fact of what happens in our brain with the type of thinking that I have, right? So spiritually speaking too, like, where are they at? So as they progress in life, are you looking at just the nature of a relationship and the byproduct of your intimacy with kids? Like, are you noticing a difference or an excellence with respect to those kind of the metrics, biopsychosocial, spiritual, and as you even described this idea of like the end result of you do, I'll watch. I think that actually that forum is a really easy way to characterize what that looks like, right? Going into this place of launching with our kids. And so measuring that, but also, again, the idea would be, okay, so having the structure in place, as we've talked about even last time, that when you are giving them opportunity to practice or trying it on, that when there's violation or there's a kind of a deviation from the common plane, that you have the process to come back and correct. That you give opportunity mutually, depending on their stage of life, that you give them opportunity to engage it correctly or with process of reconciliation, that they have a place of repair with the process or with you and the system. So does that make sense?
Yeah. Okay. And then we talked about this a little bit before. How does that play out into this is maybe shifting gears a little bit, but into the realms of community? Because I think one of the things that's so painful as we navigate those things, and even with the processes in place in these systems, there's this slow severing that's happening of relationship, I think, where it's like, I mean, even right now, my second grader is around me less than he was 4 years ago. And so our relationship is growing just gradually more distance. How do we navigate this almost a slow loss, a slow distancing, and a change in community was one of the things we talked about.
Yeah. Yep. Well, so this has the idea of community, man. There are so many different applications with this. So not only does it help benefit our sense of safety, right, or discovering what security looks like, where like I will help. My best friend has a 5-year-old, and I will still discipline him in a much different way than he does, and it's a useful discipline. It's like he knows that I love him. I'm like his uncle, right? So even the idea of community in that is something that could be helpful in correcting. But it's also really critical for us as parents to have community, not only for kind of this cross-cutting, interaction with security and trustworthiness and all that, but also for when we don't have kids, right? What's going to carry us into this post-launch with our own children, and what are we going to fill our time with? Building intimacy, and if you recall, what we call intimacy is intimacy, right? A unique special knowledge not shared by everyone, right? So when you have a community of people that have gone through life with you potentially, or gone through the stages of parenting with you, when you guys can still connect in a very intimate way about what it was like to be and have that reference. It's beautiful too. So not only does it help promote launching for your kids, gives them resources that go beyond us, right? That also gives you a position to be prepared for when it's time for that.
That's really good. What about navigating, helping parents and helping me navigate? How do we help our kids begin to build their own community when it's no longer us? Because one of those transitions is right now our nuclear family, and their aunts, uncles, cousins. That's a big source of their community right now. As they age, that will change. And there's parents right now who are probably like, totally. Like they want to hang out with their friends. Like you go on family vacation, they're trying to get away from you sometimes to go find their friends or whatever. Help us. Community is part of that.
Yes.
But how do we equip our kids to do that well?
Yeah. So I think a really, really, really important piece is, what is the measure of their people picker? Like, what do they use to say, I want to spend time with this person?
Yep.
And all of what we've already discussed, right, leading up to this point of chasing a community that will help keep accountable with respect to their decisions going forward and the choices they make or promote or whatever, is how are they going to measure it? So have you represented security in the home in a way that says, this is the thing I want to replicate? Or has it been one where they may say, I don't want anything to do with this? And at this point, if you've got the insight and you've discovered this, right? Maybe there's this idea of like, okay, you've now surrounded them, promoted some kind of scenario in which they are able to get involved with that says, no, this is really good. I get people all the time, right, that come into my office, and this is effectively what they're asking of me. Help me challenge my measure, right? How do I choose people? I keep getting in these broken relationships. I find that I keep doing these same things over and over and over again, and often it's because there is an undealt with kind of point of suffering that they've not allowed it to turn into something because of family of origin, because of some relationship or marriage. And so what this is in terms of community is one that will say, I can refine, right? Continue to refine this measure of what I'm going to choose going forward. Even you and I have talked about fly fishing. Yep. You just told me not that long ago, you're like, there's all these people I want to go fly fish with. Yeah. Which tells me that there's some interest based on your interactions with them. There's some measure that you have that you're like, I want to spend some specific time with these people. Yep. Maybe not everybody, but there are those people, right?
Yeah, for sure.
So what's the measure? What are we equipping our kids? It makes me think of Addie loves Mackenzie River. She just loves that place. She wants to go there. Anytime we go out to dinner, that's where she wants to go. So much so that Camden goes, you always want to go there. But here's the idea, right? When we're there, I almost always give them the first opportunity to order what they want. To have this assertiveness with something that's not a true threat. Right. But they always start right now, they always start with timidity. They're getting less and less timid about it. Sure. But they start that way. The idea is like, how do they practice asserting who they are with appropriate reference to risk? Yeah. To have courage in the midst of being afraid, Does that help?
It does. Can you comment a little bit then on even some of the, how do we help our kids? So maybe if they're younger kids, and even older, that got me spinning and thinking about how do we help our kids evaluate other people? Do you balance that against like, your own values. I mean, with the Christian worldview, you know, I want Harvey to be and Cohen both to be people who seek out people who are lonely, and to be like people who bring justice and peace and you know, like the Hebrew phrase of shalom into situations. Like, I want them to be people who exhibit God's love to those around them, and I also want them to have deep, rich friendships with other people who are doing the same thing with them, right? And a great community. We use that phrase.
Yes.
How do we help our kids pick those things out? And, you know, I mean, I remember, you know, even growing up, sometimes the conversation, I don't know that I like that friend of yours, Jordan. And I'd always be like, why? Like, I like them. And, you know, maybe it was I liked their backyard, or I liked that they had a trampoline and we didn't, or maybe it was, oh, this kid's hilarious. Or, I mean, there's so many different reasons as kids that we have these value judgments. How do we as parents step into that and say, and guide some of their people picking measurement?
Yeah. Well, you know, you and I are not any different than our kids in that we will choose what's the most familiar, typically, right? Our brain is not in a business of wasting energy. This is why we said in an earlier episode, we have habits. So what kind of habit are you creating for your structure? Is the habit of how we engage relationship one of safety and love? Or love and trustworthiness, right? Are we engaging one another where it says, I see who you are, it matters to me right now, and here's a safe way to transact what just happened? Because if that's familiar, they're going to have that as a primary point of reference or filtering as their people picker goes, right? I didn't necessarily come from this system.
Right.
My system is real chaotic. So I didn't get to learn kind of what this looked like in the reformation of my filter until almost more grad school. I've had a couple of really good friendships throughout my life, and they've been a solid measure. But the idea that as parents we're uniquely positioned to emphasize familiarity of what's true, right, noble, honorable, praiseworthy, all the things, right? That when we do that and make it familiar, our kids get to see that and sense it out. How many times, and I think we use this example maybe at one point, have you thought about a car? Or, you know, I noticed this one Tesla one time that had like these different color rims. My kids see Teslas everywhere now.
Right.
You know, the idea is like, it's familiar. Now they identify the familiarity. It's no different psychologically, emotionally, spiritually, whatever. So I think that kind of gets at the question.
No, that's huge, because I think sometimes, I mean, the way I would almost do it is like it's one of those bad habits that we have. It's a joke among parents: do as I say, not as I do. And so the opposite of that, though, is like, if you want your kids to have, I'm putting words in your mouth a little bit, but if you want your kids to pick good people and good community, you have to show them and create good community where you are.
Yes.
Right? And so, because they're going to go to what is familiar. And if great community, healthy relationships, and those things are modeled, then that's what they're going to seek out. Am I hearing you right?
Yes. And the other thing is, you know, even as a parent, when you as you talked about like maybe the evaluation of your own friends growing up, right? Like, I'm not so sure I like that friend, Jordan. Right? The idea is like, what am I doing with my kids in terms of asking about their friends and promoting the relationships with them that do represent the things that are good, right, true, noble, honorable, praiseworthy. Because, you know, that's another thing, right? If we give encouragement, right, the expression of who they are comes out in that encouragement or edification or proliferation, promotion. So,
well, and that was one of the things I wanted to ask you about is, you know, a lot of what we're talking about is a little bit on the corrective side of violated things. We talked about that in the last episode. In this one, we're touching on it. How do we, this sounds almost silly, but how do we do a good job of also celebrating and reinforcing some of those things? So, I mean, even to where it's not like cheesy, but sometimes it will be cheesy, and that's okay. But how do we help our kids go, yeah, way to go, thumbs up? I mean, some of it might just be that, even as I say it out loud. Yeah, do that. But are there ways that we could reinforce some of the things that we're seeing to go, yes, that's exactly what it's supposed to look like?
Yes. So the first example, I know I already talked about this, and I don't know, I think it was maybe episode 2 even, where our common plane, Lehman's, we love people, help people, and we don't quit. And there was that instance where Camden's bat, you know, he lost his bat for hitting Addie with it, and she went to recover it. And she went to fix it and restore the bat that just hit her, right? Well, the following day. And so one of the ideas of celebrating, I went right up to her and I said, Addie Mac, that's loving and helpful, and I will celebrate that every time. I said I will reward that every time.
Yep.
And so in those moments where it's big,
Yep.
absolutely you consolidate and solidify it as good, right? You stamp it as good. But even in simple things, like we're driving to school this morning, and Addie sings a song about a bus, and it was just the most random song about a bus, and I thought it was the funniest thing. And I looked back in the mirror and I looked at her and I was like, that was so funny. And she had the most solid, authentic smile because she felt so received, so validated for a simple song, right? Yeah. That her creativity matters in a real simple, scenario. Yeah. So the idea of celebration all day, the other thought that comes up to me, or for me, is, Philippians 4, where it says, be anxious for nothing, but in prayer and petition with thanksgiving, present your requests to God, right? The idea, don't be focused on future bad, but right now, here's what we do with thanksgiving. And I think celebration often is the same idea of gratitude for the for the experience that you're having, or with what other people are doing. Celebrating and having gratitude for that, I think, is powerful.
Love it. And that's actually the perfect segue as we begin to wrap up our conversation. We've talked about this idea of savoring. And savoring has kind of some undertones of Thanksgiving because it's being present and thankful for what's happening right here and right now. Talk about savoring in the context of parenting.
This morning, Camden and Addie, they came down probably at 5 a.m. again.
That's early.
Yeah, it's early.
That's early.
And I practice savoring as much as I can here, because when they want to just cuddle, it's not going to be that way for very much longer. Right. So they're on either side of me, and I can feel Camden, like his heavy breathing, his crusty hair. Oh, it's the best. Yeah. I can feel their cold arms. They have their own little smell. Savoring is the idea that I take in all the information that my senses have to offer. Sight, sound, touch, taste, smell. You think about, like, when you savor a meal, you take a bite and you feel all of what you're eating. Every memory that you have, as far back as you can remember, has some sourced information in the senses. You pull up a memory right now from way back, it's going to have some sense. Right. You remember the cold water in the lake. You remember the fish pulling on the string, right, on the line. The idea is that savoring is the specific intentional act of absorbing the information that's present for your senses. So as it goes right now, you and I are in we have to make sure this is active because we got 5 minutes left, right? As it goes toward to the process of transitioning with kids who are about to launch, right? The limited time that they give us when they're older, that has to be something that we savor, that we don't discourage or get upset because there's certain things, but we make time for absorbing all the information that's present. Yeah,
and I love that idea, because one of the things you talked about this, how our brains, they're always trying to conserve energy and not burn extra calories. And so one of the things they talk about in creating new memories is doing something different, because when you get in a habit and you get into muscle memory, it's like driving home and you don't know how you got home. Like, how did I get here? Well, your brain it's not storing any of that information because it's all the same. It's the same road, same turns, etc. And so one of the ways we can trigger our brain to store something new is to engage a different part of our senses. And I love that idea with kids, because there's been some specific moments that I remember thinking, I want to remember this forever. And I'm trying to just capture that moment. And so what it forces me to do is this is just anecdotal. It forces me to be present in the moment and go, what am I seeing? What am I hearing? What am I smelling? What am I feeling? All the senses. I probably missed one. And those memories actually stick. Or doing something different with your kids actually forces your brain to go, oh, this is something new. It's not just the routine.
And the other benefit to this is it feels like it slows time down.
Absolutely.
When you're smoking through, you're like, where did the time go? It's because you're not absorbing information. You're just being cerebral. And that's one aspect of the brain, right?
Which happened to me even yesterday was I was in a moment that was pretty routine for our bedtime, but we just did it differently, and I slowed down. I was like, I just want to be present in this moment. But I can remember everything we did because I chose to engage it different, even though it was routine. It was that slowing.
So this idea with the 5 senses, savoring is one which is one that like firms up and solidifies and is a compensatory process actually for our memory.
Yeah.
So much so that it's also referred to as grounding when you're trying to intervene with something that's maybe more problematic. When Cohen's losing it, you gave him something to feel and hear and to do. The idea with that is that grounding's interventional, savoring's compensatory. Yeah. So,
and I think that's a perfect way to wrap up the conversation. Is that we as parents should savor the moments and
every one of them
and enjoy the season and the ride that we're on.
Yeah.
Well, thanks, Dustin, so much
Absolutely.
for these last several episodes, and just so grateful for your time, your energy, your intentionality, and it's been fun talking to you.
Yeah, thanks for sharing space, man.